In this episode, I review Mad Enchantment, Claude Monet and the Painting of the Water Lilies by Ross King. This is a moving account of Monet's final years, his enormous water lilies project, declining health, personal loss, and determination to keep painting through the First World War. More than a story about a famous artist, this is a powerful reminder for every creative person, especially those of us in middle life and beyond, that our most meaningful work may still be ahead of us. Hello and welcome to How to Loosen Up Your Painting, the podcast for artists and creative people who want to make art, enjoy the process, and keep moving forward with courage and purpose. I'm Malcolm Dewey, and today I want to share a book that is currently top of my list for 2026. It is called Mad Enchantment, Claude Monet and the Painting of the Water Lilies by Ross King. Now you may know Claude Monet as one of the founders of Impressionism, the painter of haystacks, poplar trees, ruined cathedral, gardens, and of course, those beautiful water lilies. But this book is not primarily about the young revolutionary impressionist Monet. It is about Monet in his later years, an aging artist living through physical pain, failing eyesight, grief, self-doubt, and the horror of the First World War. And yet, during this challenging period, he undertook what may have been the most ambitious artistic project of his entire life. The huge water lilies panels, later known as the Grande Decoration. These were not small paintings made for a collector's sitting room. They were vast, immersive panels designed to surround the viewer in a world of water, reflections, sky, foliage, light, and color. And Monet intended them as a gift to France. There is something enormously inspiring in that, because here was a man who had every reason to stop. He had already achieved international recognition. He was quite rich. He had made his name. He had struggled for decades and become successful. He could have rested. He could have painted smaller pictures. He could have stepped away from the pressure of making something new. But he did not. Instead, in his 70s and 80s, he continued to reach for work that was larger, deeper, and more demanding than anything he had done before. So today, I want to talk about Monet's last great artistic battle, and more importantly, what it can teach those of us making art today, especially if you're in that middle stretch of life, perhaps in your 40s, 50s, 60s, or beyond, and wondering, is it too late for me? Can I still improve? Does my art really matter? Should I bother starting something ambitious now? Or perhaps you are simply trying to find the energy to get back into the studio after a difficult season. This episode is for you. So this book is more about water lilies, of course. Ross King's Mad Enchantment gives us a vivid account of Monet's final years at Giverny. By this stage, Monet had spent years creating the garden that would become the source of so much of his art. He had his famous Japanese bridge, the pond, the weeping willows, irises, flowers, and of course, the water lilies floating across the surface of the pond. But when we look at these paintings in a museum or in a book, it's easy to imagine they came from a peaceful, idyllic life. A garden, a pond, flowers, and light. Lovely. But the reality behind these paintings was far more complicated. Monet was dealing with the emotional aftermath of the death of his beloved wife Alice. He was aging. He had an extended family to look after. He felt increasingly isolated, although, to be fair, he liked his privacy. He also developed cataracts that affected the way he saw color and light. For a painter whose entire life depended on seeing subtle changes in atmosphere, color, and value, this was devastating. Imagine that. Imagine your vision changing when painting is the thing you love most. Imagine looking at your palette and not trusting the colors you see. Imagine wondering if your best work is behind you. And then, during this period, Europe was plunged into the First World War. The war came uncomfortably close to Giverny. Monet worried about his family, about his son Michel, who was going to join up. He was grieving, anxious, angry, and at times deeply depressed. And still, he continued to paint. Not every day with effortless joy, not in some neat and romantic way. He struggled, he delayed, he destroyed canvases, he argued with friends, he became frustrated, and he doubted himself. But he kept returning to the work. That is one of the central ideas I take from this book. Being a committed artist does not mean you never doubt yourself. It means you return to the work despite the doubt. Around 1914, Monet began planning what would become his great Water Lilies decorations. The scale was extraordinary. These were immense paintings created in a purpose-built studio barn, large enough to accommodate them. Monet was no longer simply painting a view of his garden. He was creating an entire environment. The paintings were meant to give the viewer a feeling of stillness and immersion, as if you were standing at the edge of the pond, looking into the water that reflected sky, clouds, branches, lilies, and endless shifting color. There is often no clear horizon in these works, no obvious beginning or end, although they were basically intended to give you the experience of sunrise to sunset. The paintings became almost abstract. They are about sensations, atmosphere, memory, light, and time. And what I find so moving is that Monet conceived of these works as a gift to the French state, a symbol of peace after the destruction of war. In fact, he offered them in the days following the armistice in 1918, and that was a gesture that mattered. At a time when the world had been shattered by war, Monet's response was not to turn away from beauty, it was to create more of it. He wanted to offer people a place of calm, a place to breathe, and a place where they could be surrounded by water, light, and peace. Isn't that what art can do for anyone? It does not have to solve every problem in the world, but it can remind us that there is still beauty, sensitivity, humanity, and hope. Your painting may not be a vast installation in Paris, but perhaps your paintings bring calm to someone's home. Perhaps it inspires another beginner to start, and perhaps it helps you to process a difficult time. Perhaps it's simply a faithful record of the beauty you noticed on an ordinary, everyday. All of that matters. Art matters because attention matters, and beauty matters because we need it, more so than ever in a world that seems to be wanting to reject beauty. So, lesson number 1, your age is not a deadline. One of the most powerful lessons from Monet's life is this: your age is not a creative deadline. There's a strange pressure many artists feel, particularly when we reach midlife. We look at younger artists online. We see people who seem to have built a career very quickly. We may see someone painting beautifully at the age of 25, selling online, teaching, posting every day, and appearing full of confidence. And we start to tell ourselves stories. I should have started earlier. I missed my chance. I'm too old to improve. I don't have enough time left to become good. But Monet's later works offer a very different story. His most radical, expansive, and emotionally powerful paintings came late in life. He was not trying to recreate his younger self. He was not painting like the young impressionist who shocked the art world decades earlier. He was still learning, still changing, taking risks, and searching. You must remember that in the early 1900s, Impressionism was basically over. There was the post-impressionists, there was the beginning of abstract painting. And Monet was he still relevant? There were those that criticized him for hanging on to Impressionism. So there were all these negative pressures going on. And of course, there was a lot of negativity in the world. But Monet didn't give up. He was a strange person at this time of life, but very relatable as well. Quite cantankerous at times, and others extremely jovial, and he loved nothing more than vast Sunday lunches and having guests around. One of his great friends was the statesman Georges Clemenceau, a real supporter of Monet's work and the planned gift to the nation. Keep in mind the very important thing that you do not need to become the artist you imagine you would have been at 25. You can become the artist you're becoming now. Your life experience is not a disadvantage. It is real and important. The years you have lived, the joys, disappointments, responsibilities, losses, recoveries, family dramas, work, change in confidence, and change in perspective, and indeed, change in health. These things can deepen your art. Your painting hand may be learning new techniques, but your heart and eye have been gathering experience for years. So if you're starting again after raising a family or after a demanding career, after illness, after caring for others, or simply after years of putting your own creativity last, please do not think you are too late and you are not alone. You are here and it's time to get to work. The second lesson is big work often begins in uncertain conditions. We often wait for perfect circumstances before we begin something meaningful. We think things like, when I have a better studio, when I have more confidence, when life is less busy, when I understand color theory, and when I stop being afraid, then I'll begin the serious work. But Monet did not begin his great late life project under ideal conditions. He was dealing with pain, worries, loss, aging, and uncertainty, the failing eyesight, the war, and yet he began, not because the circumstances were easy, but because the work was necessary to him. This does not mean that we should glorify suffering. I don't believe artists need to be miserable in order to make meaningful art. And truth be told, Monet was sometimes his own worst enemy and brought upon himself quite a lot of trouble. A bit of emotional intelligence can save us a lot of pain and exhaustion. But we do need to let go of the belief that difficult life circumstances automatically mean we cannot create. Sometimes painting is exactly what helps us remain ourselves during hard times, keeps us grounded. It may not be the time for a huge multi-year project. It might be the time for 30 minutes and a quick painting sketch, a work in the journal, a little study, clouds, a basic landscape, a watercolor, a simple painting like a still life. But do something. Keep a thread connected to your creativity, because we can stop completely. It can become much harder to find yourself going back to your art, and remaining separated from your creativity can become a way of life, and frankly, that's not a way of living. So lesson 3, persistence is not always dramatic either. When we talk about great artists, persistence can sound grand and heroic. And yes, Monet's project was heroic in many ways. But persistence in our painting lives is usually much quieter. Persistence might mean setting up your paints even when you don't feel inspired. It might mean doing small value studies before you begin a larger landscape. It might mean finishing a painting you are tempted to abandon, or maybe returning to an abandoned painting and finishing it, if you know what I mean. Or it might mean you got to start something different. to break a pattern that was not capturing your imagination. So it means returning and trying things. Observation, working your sketchbook, creating something that appeals to you. You might not even understand why. Many of us believe that if a painting goes wrong, it proves we are not talented. But a painting going wrong proves only one thing. That is, you are painting and learning. You're in the arena. You've got to get a bit of dust kicked in your face, perhaps, but you keep going. So every painting teaches us, especially the ugly ones. A fourth lesson is you got to make some room for yourself. I think many artists, particularly women, and particularly those of us who have spent years caring for others, can find it difficult to admit that we want to make something significant. We may say, oh, it's just a hobby, it's not important, or I'm only a beginner, I'm not really an artist. We may downplay the desire to improve because it feels safer not to care. But Monet cared enormously, and he wanted to create something lasting. It's interesting to note that one of Monet's provisions was that the grand panels that he had created would go to the state only after his death. Even though he was donating them, he found it difficult to let go. Those paintings were immensely important to him, and he wanted to see them every day while he was still alive. So he was a human. He had human emotions, sometimes irrational, but immensely relatable, isn't it? He wanted to create a work on a scale that would transform the viewer's experience. So if you want to be ambitious about your art, be ambitious. It doesn't mean it's your ego. It doesn't mean you're trying to chase fame or followers or galleries or more sales. It simply means you are taking your creative life seriously. It can mean that you just want to paint something amazing and see what happens. Perhaps you just want to bring joy to other people as well. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, there's nothing wrong with bringing some joy into your own life. You don't have to paint for 8 hours a day, suffering at the easel. You may have a job, you've got family, you've got commitments. There are plenty of demands. Don't give them up, of course, but make a promise that you will always return to your painting. A couple of sessions a week, a Saturday morning, 20 minutes a day, whatever it takes. Another lesson is that your limitations can change your art, but they don't have to end it. Monet's cataracts changed the way he saw. His color perception shifted dramatically, and this caused him immense distress. Eventually, with great reluctance and quite a bit of fear, he underwent cataract surgery. Imagine cataract surgery in the early 1900s. He had to adapt to new glasses. He was always having to try out new glasses that caused him a great amount of stress. He wrestled with the challenge of judging color accurately. All of this was a major inconvenience, a real artistic crisis, and frankly, I'm not sure I could have suffered through all of that, even with modern medical techniques. But perhaps it's much easier today. In fact, I'm sure it is. But nevertheless, what he went through, the pain, the fear, uncertainty, must have been terrific. His limitations did affect his art, but they didn't end it either. There's an important lesson right there. Maybe you feel you have less energy than you did 10 years ago. Maybe you have pain in your hands. Your eyesight is not as good. There may be all sorts of, aging-related things going on. I don't even want to go into the long list of potential problems we all face as we start getting older. But I think painting is one of those gifts to all of us, even at this age, and we must accept the gifts that are presented to us. So it might require a few changes of techniques, perhaps using larger brushes, perhaps working on a smaller scale, simplifying the palette, trying different mediums, trying acrylics instead of oils if it's more practical, or small gouache studies, anything like that. It's all part of the mix, and it's all available to us. We are so fortunate to have all of these options close at hand. There's a tendency, especially in difficult times, to think that beauty is somehow trivial. So this lesson is that beauty can be an act of courage. Painting flowers, gardens, skies, rivers, quiet landscapes. Some people say that what's the point? We live in an ugly world and we've got to depict that and put it front and center in our lives. Well, I reject that. Monet's Water Lilies suggest something about beauty. Beauty is not trivial. Beauty restores. Beauty helps us remember what is worth protecting. And beauty helps us to take a pause in a noisy and anxious world. When Monet offered his water lily paintings as a gesture of peace after the war, he was making a statement. Peace, stillness, and contemplation matter. It was something he felt very close, very dearly in his heart, brought on obviously by his experience throughout his life, but especially his beautiful garden, which was such an important refuge to him. He was offering that to the world. Paint what you are drawn to paint, of course. Paint the coast, your garden, mountains, local streets, your morning cup of coffee, if that's what's in front of you. Never underestimate the value of bringing beauty into the world and helping others to see the beauty in our everyday lives. So a practical challenge for all of us is to create our own small, grand decoration. A practical challenge inspired by Monet. So I'm suggesting that you just find a subject that's close to you. What's beautiful in your world? Commit to creating a small series of paintings, perhaps 4 or 6 paintings or more. Create them over the next 6 months. The important thing is find a subject that makes you feel immersed in something that's beautiful, that encourages you to observe more deeply. Take some time to figure this out for yourself and then start painting. Paint a small series, as I've suggested. It could be in different times of the day, in different light conditions. Try at different times of the day, different weather. Paint a close-up. Paint with a limited palette. Paint it loosely. Paint it from your memory. Just let the subject guide you as well. This is something Monet understood so well. He did not paint a subject once and decide he had captured it. He returned again and again because light changes, color changes, seasons change, and we change. The more deeply you look, the more there is to paint. So my closing thoughts on the book, Mad Enchantment. I think it's a wonderful book because it does not present Monet as a flawless genius who simply produced beautiful paintings because he was this famous artist. It shows us him as a human being, a man who was gifted, difficult, grieving, determined, ambitious, also fearful, but deeply committed to his work. It shows us that a great artist can struggle enormously and still continue. Maybe that's what makes him a great artist. And this message might be just something to keep in the back of your mind when you're feeling that you're not ready or you've got doubts. And just remember that this is probably the best time to begin. The next painting might not be your best painting, but it may be the painting that leads you towards that. So you have to do it. You have to go forward. You have to try. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, I suggest you grab a copy of the book, read it through. It's quite a long read, but very, very entertaining. And I just kept going. Before I knew it, the book was over. I was quite sorry for it, so that's always a good sign. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give it a like, and leave a review. Podcast reviews are important, and a good review is good for having people discover this podcast. If you'd like more practical help with your painting, you want some courses, tutorials, you can find that on my painting school. You can also have a look on my website, malcolmdeweyfineart.com, and of course on YouTube, Malcolm Dewey on YouTube. Lots to learn there as well. Thanks very much for joining me. I do appreciate your time, and wish you all the best with your next painting. Cheers for now.